Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal Engine and also salted, dried peanut butter squid. We're your hosts. My name is Alex Coulomb.
And I'm Jacob Feldman. Welcome, everyone. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, share. I don't know. Do something.
Destroy
it. This is your mission if you choose to accept it. Well, man, has it been a few weeks? A few busy weeks here. What are we talking about today?
I think, Jacob, one thing we might want to say up top here is for anyone who cares about what some in the ether might term a podcast season, I think we're going to call this the first episode of season 2. Is that right?
I think so. So this is a whole new generation.
Everything's different now.
We're not unofficial anymore. No, I take that back.
Careful now.
We are still the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, but it's version 2 now. What does that mean, Alex?
I don't know. You say version 2, I say version 0.02, like still coming up on version 1. I think it means that we've been doing this for about a year, and it's been quite a ride. It's certainly the longest podcast pursuit I've ever had. Had two kind of, I wouldn't say failed attempts at this before, but we had a good idea and then we just couldn't find the time or bandwidth to keep it going. So I would just like to say I'm proud of us for continuing to chug along here.
Yeah, and if anyone would like to keep account of how many episodes we've gone while not having an episode completely dedicated to Unreal Engine, let us know. Someone has to be keeping a tracker somewhere. It was it's been 8 episodes since you only talked about Unreal Engine. Maybe that's version 2. I don't know. We're still open to feedback, guys.
Yeah, we're figuring it out. So I think to kick off season 2, I did a lot of talking in our 2-part finale about Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser. I would like you to talk a lot this episode, Jacob. You got to go to a fun little event that we were both at last year. This year, it was just you. So what was the name of the event you were at, Jacob?
Oh, man, it was good old SIGGRAPH. And it's not just any SIGGRAPH. It's the 50th anniversary of SIGGRAPH this year, which was very exciting. And I'm excited to kind of get into it. I don't know how you want to start this, Alex, but I'm happy to dive in however you like.
Well, I think we got some breathing room in today's episode. So why don't we set the stage a little bit for anyone who's never been to SIGGRAPH, maybe doesn't even really know what SIGGRAPH is. How about you introduce us to the very concept, Jacob?
Sure. So there is an overarching academic consortium called ACM.
Do you know what it stands for?
Nope. I'm
gonna find out right now.
Man, we're both gonna see who gets it first.
Association of Computing Machineries, Special Interest Group on Computer Graphics and Interactive Techniques. That's ACM SIGGRAPH.
Yep. So ACM is this overarching organization. SIGGRAPH is as Alex said, the Special Interest Group on Computer Graphics, I guess.
And Interactive Techniques.
And essentially, it's a big conference dedicated to nerds interested in graphics, VFX, games, really anything GPU related, pretty much, though not strictly speaking.
CPU features need not apply.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it. I had a very interesting run-in with quantum computing this year's SIGGRAPH, which I'm very intrigued to get into. But
I hope it was just like the TV show Devs, for anyone who's seen that.
So overall, it's an academic conference, which means people can submit academic papers and posters and research and stuff like that. And there's a lot of that goes on. And then equally, it's an industry event where there's usually a pretty big presence, particularly from VFX and games and around their use cases. Of course, there's I would call AEC and visualization an equal party, or maybe not equal, but it has a significant presence as well. But it's usually a conference for technical folks who are part of the community. And then there's also like a very they usually have a like a show floor where vendors and stuff like that can kind of have a presence. The company I'm part of had a a booth there, and so I spent a good amount of time. I'm going to preface this episode saying I apologize. I'm going to miss a lot of stuff about SIGGRAPH, and just because I spent a lot of time, running in and out of meetings or talking to people on the show floor, and it was really great to talk to so many cool people. But it did mean I didn't get to as many talks as I really would have liked, which is typical, but unfortunate.
Yeah, it's impossible to do it all. Like these conferences, there are people you want to see, there's parties to go to, there's talks, there's demos. It's a constant sense of FOMO for people who didn't go at all like me, but even for people like yourself who are there and can't possibly be in 5 places at once.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, like, so when you sign up for the conference, the online access, there's a ton of material that comes with it. And it used to be, I don't know if they still do this, but they shipped a USB drive. I have an old one here. It was a USB drive. I'm trying to see if I can pull it out real quick. And they put on this every bit of content from the conference, like all the papers, all the presentations. So I don't know if I'm gonna be able to show this. Well, kind of word for it. It says SIGGRAPH on it.
I believe you.
Yeah, so this was 128 gigabytes of SIGGRAPH content, which is quite a lot. So there's usually a lot of stuff that goes on, and it's just impossible to get all of it. But they usually are good about documenting it. So if there's anything you didn't get to see, you can usually find it. Now there's a whole host of events. So like I was part of a few events that are deemed birds of a feather, which are more just like round table conversations, stuff like that. Those typically are not recorded and are really just about having open conversations where you don't have to sign a ton of NDAs. But overall, a lot of content is there.
Yes, and now's as good as time as any to say there's a lot of people who messaged me during SIGGRAPH asking me where I was, because I did exist on the schedule because I was supposed to be co-hosting a Birds of a Feather session for live VR theater. I was sent a recording of it. It looks like it went splendidly, fantastically. Wish I could have been there, but unfortunately I did not get my ducks in a row to get out there to the West Coast. But the Birds of a Feather seem great. Like I'm really glad those sessions happen.
Yeah. What I will say, and I guess this is kind of maybe getting a little off track, is that so this year's conference happened in LA.
Yeah.
And I believe it happens in LA every other year or something like that.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know it was that frequent. I thought it was like the Olympics, like a big tour. Yeah,
there's some like regular interval to happening in LA because obviously like Hollywood and a lot of industries are there. And it's usually the best attendance. So I think there were like 20-something thousand people, which is a big conference. So I know they hold in LA pretty frequently, but let me tell you, downtown LA is just not where I like hanging out.
No, I agree.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I like LA. There's a lot to do there. There's tons of culture, but none of it is in downtown LA.
Yeah.
So like, word of advice for people who are looking to vacation in LA, just don't stay in downtown. Just like go anywhere else.
Literally anywhere else.
Yeah, like it's really not very pleasant.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was fine for me because like I spent the majority of the day inside of the conference center, and so did most people.
Yeah.
But outside of that, yeah, not too great.
Yeah, well, the Next Stage conference that we talked about briefly on the show, I was in LA for that, and the official hotel for the conference was the Ace Hotel, which was a little expensive. So my teammates and we were like, well, let's see if we can find an Airbnb by the hotel, and we found a very reasonably priced one that looked beautiful. And indeed, once you got inside, it was. But the outside of the building looked completely condemned. Like we were joking, like the instructions should have said, like, look for a building that looks completely unoccupied, like it's about to be demolished, and that'll be the place where the Airbnb is.
That's where you'll sleep tonight.
Yes, exactly.
That's great. Yeah, well, it's a side note, but definitely was not my preference. Next year will be in Denver.
Oh, cool. I love Colorado.
Yeah, and I'm personally much more excited for that.
Yeah.
than LA. But overall, like I said, spent a lot of time in the conference center, so can't really complain.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive right in. No need to go in any kind of major chronological order, unless there was some big like opening keynote thing that was amazing. But like, what do you want to chat about?
So, okay, I missed most of the content, most of the
Right.
keynote, right?
Except
but
for
I heard,
one.
yeah, except for the NVIDIA keynote, right? But I heard from other folks. I was asking folks who would come to the booth, what do you think of the keynote and stuff like that? Most people were pretty like lukewarm. They were talking about kind of the stuff you'd expect. There was a this is not the talk I went to, but there was a keynote on IBM's quantum computing, which I thought was pretty which I heard was pretty interesting and pretty compelling. I didn't hear a whole lot about the other ones, and I was at the NVIDIA keynote, but um, the big highlights that I heard from people are one, and this is something that would interest you, is that they had the varifocal
Yeah.
prototype. Meta had the varifocal prototype of their headset there. And you're going to be very disappointed in me, Alex, but I actually didn't get a chance to try it. But I heard a lot of secondhand reports from people who are saying, yeah, like you could read all the way up to like a piece of paper or like an iPad at like 3 feet away, and like you could like hear the actual movement of the lenses, and like it seemed impossibly expensive and stuff like that. But people were saying it was really pretty amazing. So like for what it's worth, there was this demo as part of like the future technologies section, and people were saying it was very, very good. For those of you who maybe want a little background on what this means, is that like there's this traditional problem with VR headsets, and Alex, jump in when I tell this wrong, called the near field distance problem, something like that.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, and essentially it means that your eyes are designed or trained, you know, from childhood to adjust its focus based on the perceived depth of items. So like when you look at something far away, your eyes know how to adjust to focus on that. The problem with VR is that if items appear far away, well, the screen is right in front of you and you're not controlling the focus of the content. So like the game engine has complete control over how it wants to place things in focus. Most of the time, everything is in focus. Like very few games use any depth of field, or if they do, it's usually pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't usually use that in VR, right? Am I getting this right, Alex?
Yeah, and now that we have foveated rendering, you can pair that with eye tracking, and you can get some sense of focusing. But then it's tricky because the game is then going to be making certain assumptions. Because foveated rendering is technically different, but you could use a similar kind of thing for eye tracking to be like, oh, well, I think the player's looking at this thing that's 100 feet away. Let's put that in focus. But if you get it wrong, that's really going to make people feel like they're about to have a stroke or something. So it's very tricky. Yeah.
And fundamentally, from like an optics perspective, there is like a physical difference between focusing like just something that looks blurry,
correct,
and something that is out of focus. It
Yeah.
has to do with the angle that light rays are coming in, right? So from a display going through lenses in a VR headset, they're all coming in straight.
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, you can make it blurry, but that doesn't necessarily mean your eyes are actually doing anything to focus. So there's like a bunch of issues with how your like physiology
That's a word, physiology.
I'm definitely gonna get some nasty looks from my fiance who's in med school. There's a clear difference between that and what's being rendered and displayed to, which usually, well, there have been thoughts about it could cause damage to your eyes, and that's why there's like all this hesitation around younger kids using it. It can cause damage to your eyes, and overall it just introduces a lot of strain. So the idea with varifocal is that you actually you take physical lenses to change the actual angle and direction that light is being passed through to your eyes, to emulate the experience of physically focusing your eyesight on different objects. So it takes like the foveated rendering idea and then moves actual physical lenses to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And it's been I remember back at the last Oculus Connect, the in-person one, they were talking about this. They showed us a demo of some contraption.
Was this the half dome prototype?
Maybe, yeah. I can't remember if that's what it was called. What is half dome? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's correct. So there was a prototype there that they showed, which was accomplishing this to some extent, but they had a working prototype at SIGGRAPH. I heard lots of reports that was very cool. So that seemed like a highlight. Maybe it wasn't a highlight for me because I didn't actually get to see it, but a lot of people were talking about it. Let's see what else. There was a whole display on the evolution of the Utah teapot, which seemed exciting.
The Utah teapot. I didn't know it was called the Utah teapot. And give a little background on why anyone should care about a teapot in computer graphics.
So the Utah teapot is kind of one of the first reference 3D objects of all time. So it was part, and I didn't know this off the top of my head, or I didn't remember this off the top of my head. I just Googled this. I'm not going to give myself credit. It was created by Martin Newell, PhD student, University of Utah. And Utah, I do know that the Utah graphics department was one of the very early computer graphics departments. And so the Utah teapot, and in this day and age, you did not have, you didn't have modeling software. So these were manually programmed vertices, and it was the first object. So the Utah teapot has all these curves, and it was designed to display the ideas of tangent space, where you're able to render or shade objects to appear round, even though they contain very rough vertices. So there's a lot of it's been a almost running joke, or reference object inside of rendering. Like if you look online at any graphics nerd who's trying to show off their latest rendering technique, it's going to be either Utah teapot, the dragon, I don't remember the name of it, or it might be a selection of other random objects like a Mobius strip, or all these other kind of funky objects that are meant to display different rendering complexities or techniques. So definitely it seemed pretty interesting because it was the 50th year of SIGGRAPH. They had kind of this evolution, which I thought was pretty interesting. Here, any question, anything you want me to talk about, Alex? I'm rambling, but
I mean, I guess so. Okay, here's the thing. Let me give you my perspective from the outside. Yeah. I was watching social media pretty closely during SIGGRAPH because I kept expecting, especially for the 50th anniversary, that there were going to be some major announcements from someone, maybe Epic, maybe NVIDIA, maybe, computer graphics scientists at Stanford or something. Maybe there's a new Cornell box. Cornell box is this
that's the other
red-green thing where you put all the objects to render, the Mobius strip and all that. And I didn't see a lot on social media of anyone being like, holy cow, I just had my mind blown by Paul Debevec or whatever, someone announcing something crazy. So I guess what I'd love to hear is anything that you think should blow people's socks off, or that they should just be aware of that got announced or shown or demoed. Yeah.
So I would say some of the bigger announcements were Unity kind of officially unveiled, they had made a purchase of Weta's pipelining and tool division
years ago.
And they officially launched Unity Weta tools. I felt like they could have been much more creative with the name. For the record, I feel like they could have done a lot with that, and they really kind of dropped the ball. No offense to friends and family at Unity.
Also, however, the website just says contact us. You can't even download it.
Yeah. So I just felt like they could have done a little better than Weta tools. But fundamentally, they kind of announced that, and they were showing a few things. So one of the big ones was Ziva.
Ziva Dynamics.
So Ziva Dynamics which is their like AI animation. You just pass.
It's like their it's like their metahuman stuff.
It's like their metahuman, but they have like it's now very AI integrated so that you can like have a conversation with them and stuff like that. Like what else is part of that tool set? Still a little unclear to me. I think it seems like they're trying to make some announcement and more is to come. But certainly seems pretty cool. So that was definitely one of the big announcements. You saw a lot of people walking around with Weta Tools shirts and stuff like that. What other big announcements were there?
Sorry, real quick on that. I'm laughing a little bit because I'm reading about this showcase of Avatar: The Way of Water, and Weta, of course, being a major company that works on this. And like, I'm trying to find any proof that like Unity itself was used in a big way in Avatar: The Way of Water, because yeah, but like Weta can still keep using Unreal. And again, my understanding is Unreal was a big part of their pipeline before they were acquired by Unity. And I'd be surprised if there was like a message from on high from John Riccatello, who's like, no more Unreal. But this article that I'm reading is a little bit like, it's not coming right out and saying like, Unity was the primary tool for previs or anything like that. But, they can keep just referring to Weta, a company owned by Unity, did a bunch of previs. Anyway,
right.
Go on.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of gray area there. I'm sure in the future they'll use Unity in more places. Mm-hmm. There was a reason why they made the division so that Weta proper, that does all the film production, can do whatever they want.
Right.
And Weta Tools, as owned by Unity, is pulling in the technology that Weta has developed and then presumably adapting it to Unity. Whether some of those tools get forked and continue to use Unreal in another path, I mean, that seems realistic to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a few things there.
Did you hear any big Unreal announcements? Like, I knew some folks who were giving presentations on behalf of Unreal. Some of the folks I knew said it was kind of like a dry run for some stuff that they were going to be also showing at Unreal Fest. But did you feel like there was anything stand out from Epic Games?
I had not heard anything big. I mean, they announced that they were launching the Stage app right before SIGGRAPH started.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, the Stage app is like a V2 of what was it called before?
I don't know. I actually didn't know there was a previous version of it.
There was a very bad visualization on your iPad tool. I can't remember what it was called. That would let you connect to an Unreal Engine instance, and it would allow you to do some you can move your iPad around and view the scene and stuff like that.
Oh, well, that's the VCam app. So that tends to get used more for like an actual virtual camera. I think the Stage app is for doing other stuff.
Well, so it has the same capabilities.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's using pixel streaming. So the original Stage app did not use pixel streaming. It was using its own proprietary protocol. It pretty much sucked. There was no way for them to do it. That was replaced with pixel streaming. The Stage app is that plus essentially the pixel streaming camera, or like multi-cam pixel streaming, so that many people can be all looking at the same scene and have different controls. You can assign controls to different people. So it looked pretty cool. I haven't gotten to play with it yet. But other than that, I did not hear. Did you hear anything that I didn't hear about?
No, I didn't hear anything that was major coming from Epic Games, any big announcements or anything like that, which I was a little surprised by. I feel like the Unreal keynote or whatever, not State of Unreal, but the big Unreal talk at SIGGRAPH in Vancouver last year was pretty awesome. There was some really cool metahuman stuff. So yeah, I didn't hear anything particularly noteworthy for this year, and I don't even know if Tim Sweeney was there.
I don't believe he was. No.
Yeah.
I'm looking at their list of talks, and yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot here. There was an announcement that AWS made around a deadline integration. So I think they had a talk there.
Okay.
Deadline integration with movie render queue. And then, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot here. My assumption that they would save everything for their own conference, right? Like, of course. And I'm excited for that, by the way. But yeah, so I don't think they had a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's fine. Sounds like the belle of the ball might have been NVIDIA, or did they have the most exciting content?
Yeah, and to be fair, is probably a bit of a low bar.
Okay. Fair enough.
I would say the most exciting content that I experienced was this quantum computing talk, and we'll get into it. Because there was general buzz about it, and we can get more into it. But there were a few talks about it, like one of the keynotes, like I mentioned, and there was this 101 talk that was packed. It was a huge room and it was packed full of people. And so I think that was a big topic. But let's talk about NVIDIA real quick.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a few things that are probably worth talking about here. So Tuesday morning, NVIDIA, Jensen, NVIDIA CEO, gave a keynote in person.
First time in 5 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. And we can get into this later. I got to meet Jensen, got to shake his hand and show him a demo.
Nice.
I said real words, you know. I didn't turn into a fanboy, you know. I could have. I was close. But I said real words and didn't look like a complete idiot. So you know what? Mission success with Jensen.
Anyway, Jacob.
Thank you. Getting back to the topic here. So I had some great seats, by the way. I got lucky. So my company has a pretty strong relationship with NVIDIA, and I was able to get into like an early access line. So got to keep going first. And I had this seat like front, slightly kind of on the left. And as it turns out, Jensen stood like right in front of us the entire time. So we had great seats to watch this. And it was cool to kind of see him on stage in person. But essentially, most of the stuff he talked about was kind of stuff that I was kind of expecting, and I'm coming into this a little biased because I had been kind of briefed on a lot of the stuff that they were going to talk about ahead of time, just given the stuff that we do. But you know, so he announced a few new GPU types. So they've essentially come out with this L40S GPU. There was already an L40. The L40S is kind of the unlocked version of L40, and I don't think we need to get into the naming arguments or anything like that. But they released that GPU. They announced that they would be shipping a new version of the H100, which is this huge AI training GPU, and they were going to release as H2 or GH200, which is like the same thing but twice the amount of memory. And for those who, you know, kind of aren't into this stuff, like the amount of GPU memory that you have on a GPU kind of is directly correlated in especially AI ML workloads to the size of the model that you want to train or serve inference, and inference being like how you take your model and actually, you know, run data through it so that you can get a result. So it was a big deal. Don't get me wrong. I think everyone was kind of more or less expecting that this is the kind of stuff that they would be talking about. But along with that, you know, Jensen was was more forward than I expected about the way he would address AI and its impact on the industries. Because you have to remember, this is a crowd full of people in the VFX industry and games industry, all people who are probably have to some extent some fears about the way AI is going to impact, you know, their careers and stuff like that. And Jensen was very clear about it, where he said, look, the future is like the programming language is natural language, and like the way you'll be creating content is going to be heavily kind of supplemented with, you know, generative AI. And so he gave an example using Omniverse where like you would say, hey, like take this car and generate a landscape near a bridge and do this and that and like change this, or kind of give an example of what the kind of visualization workflow would look like, where you don't have to worry about designing entire environments and stuff like that. So like there was a lot of conversation around that. He also made a big point of really going into OpenUSD.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a few conversations at SIGGRAPH around OpenUSD. So there was USD, and USD was Pixar's standard. It was technically owned, the IP was technically owned by them. It was open licensed, and like it was an open standard, but fundamentally it was Pixar's intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
And then back at, or really around GDC time, actually, so in March, they open source, and this happened like while GDC was happening. Pixar open sourced USD, so they released their intellectual property, or released the license for it, and it became OpenUSD.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then about a week before SIGGRAPH, they formed the Alliance for OpenUSD, which is composed of Epic Games, NVIDIA, Alliance for USD.
Who else is in there? Not Apple.
Epic Games. So okay, Pixar, Adobe, Autodesk, and NVIDIA, not Epic Games. I thought Epic was in there, but I must be mistaken. And then the last one, which had everyone's eyebrows raised, was Apple. Like, don't get me wrong, Apple pretty much like participates in all these discussions. They were very crucial to Vulkan and the Kronos Group, which has a lot of projects that, hey, you're wearing one. GLTF and everything else.
And I should say, by the way, I did get this at SIGGRAPH last year in Vancouver.
So don't get me wrong, Apple participates in a lot of this, but people were genuinely interested into why Apple would be a foundational member of this alliance. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think on the surface you say, oh well, this clearly leans into what they're doing with their 3D platform, with the Vision Pro and all that. I think it's a little more complicated than that, most likely. I think they have a few interests surrounding it.
And of course, they have a huge history with Pixar, of course, both Apple and Pixar having a major Steve Jobs element.
Yeah, and obviously that relationship still exists. But everyone was interested. Like out of the conversations I had about the Alliance for OpenUSD, most people were just surprised that Apple was there. Cool. But regardless, essentially it's an alliance to fund the continued, production or kind of improvements and development of USD, and to form a, kind of ecosystem to potentially fund projects, stuff like that, events, all that, which I think is very interesting. Overall, though, like to the extent that NVIDIA pushed USD, I continued to be surprised. I mean, they made a major investment in it. Don't get me wrong. Their Omniverse platform, which I actually think is quite cool, like relies heavily on it. It made a clear bet. Other folks are making this bet as well. So it's the kind of thing that there's a lot of people who have a big stake in it. But it's always surprising to kind of see how much it keeps getting brought up, and how much practically people are talking about it. I find that pretty interesting. So that was a major part of the talk. And then, they had a whole host of additional kind of product solution kind of stuff that they announced. One of the big ones was something called AI Toolkit, which was their partnership with Hugging Face, which is one of the big AI model marketplaces. So Hugging Face and NVIDIA teamed up to make this interface for interacting with generative AI models, for creating and publishing them, stuff like that. Seems pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. seems like a pretty interesting thing. So if you're interested in just kind of getting into, generative AI, maybe you're kind of looking to dip your toes in the water and you don't want to worry about as much, as much infrastructure. Seems like a pretty nice option. I just Googled AI toolkit and I'm getting some different results. So I'm going to say maybe I misremembered the name of this product release.
Is it DGX Cloud?
No, I think it's like X powered by DGX Cloud.
Yeah, I mean, the newsroom headline from NVIDIA is NVIDIA and Hugging Face to connect millions of developers to generative AI supercomputing, integration of NVIDIA DGX Cloud in the Hugging Face platform to speed LLM training and tuning, simplifies custom modeling for nearly every industry. But I don't see a platform title beyond that. Like they literally just say the Hugging Face platform.
Huh. Okay. Well, maybe there was some language there that has changed. I'm not sure, but they released a cool UI. It's worth. I don't know if there is a video online of the keynote. I assume there is.
Yeah, there is.
I would check that out. And also, Alex, your video is frozen. Just so.
Oh no, thanks. In
Our
a great position too.
Problem.
I know. I'm looking at all the other stuff. Come on, get out of here. It's because it's always late at night when my phone's about to die, and my phone serves as my video. There we are. Cool. Let's dive into quantum computing, if you think we're ready for that, Jacob. So first of all, let me tell you what I think when I hear quantum computing. Sure. So Alex Garland, who made such films as like Sunshine and Ex Machina and 28 Days and Weeks and Months and Years Later, had a TV series starring Nick Offerman called Devs, which was about this like secret AI startup that was using quantum computing to basically like go back in time and like simulate different kinds of outcomes for different things. And, the impression they give of quantum computing is it can just do an insane not only number of calculations, but do calculations in like a totally different realm from how computers nowadays do calculations. Yeah. And we've heard things like, you can get around all sorts of security using quantum computing because it's like a total side door to everything that is traditionally structured to like encrypt and keep certain people out of a thing. That's kind of like the pop culture impression of quantum computing. Tell us about the talk you saw and maybe some more grounded fact-based information about quantum computing.
Yeah. So I mean, fundamentally, some of the things you said are right in the sense that like, and we'll get into this is that the kinds of problems that you can solve with quantum computing are just totally different than classical computing. So it's worth just putting that out the bat, right? Like there's a lot obviously in this talk I'm not going to go through as part of this podcast. Let me give you some resources though out the bat in case you are interested in learning a little bit more, and I'll remind of some of these resources. But the presentation was by a gentleman. I have it here. Where did his name go? Andrew Glassner, who is a principal research scientist at Weta. I think he does a lot of their AI ML work.
Cool. Weta Digital or Weta not owned by Unity?
Well, it says Weta Digital plus Unity. So presumably Weta Tools.
Yeah.
That gives you any additional hints into what they might be doing. And I want to give him a plug because he was incredible. He gave a full 101 on quantum computing to a very large audience, and he has a book coming out called Introduction to Quantum Computing. And if I've learned anything from that talk is that I would read his book because he's very good at explaining things. And based on the note here I have from the presentation, he will have a book coming out in early 2024. So right off the bat, if you're interested in anything we talk about for the next 20 minutes, check this guy out and check out his book. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about what he actually spoke about. So essentially the way he kind of set this up was to say, the first thing you got to do is forget everything about how you structure computer programs. So in standard computing, the way everything works is that you have a series of instructions, and each instruction follows, what we call control flow, in the sense that you have physical, pipelines inside of your CPU. Those are usually referred to as threads or cores. Obviously, this is a generalization, but you take essentially operations and you feed them through a pipeline, and they're, processed, one at a time in a linear fashion or in parallel with multiple threads or cores. And all those operations are, feed into some sort of atomic, truth of the world state that you can monitor. And most computer programs struggle with parallelism, because standard computing always requires that you have some ground truth, and there's always some, desired state. And fundamentally, like, folks who are familiar with computer programming, you're probably used to things like for loops, or things like if and statements, and all this kind of stuff that we're used to when we're programming. And quantum computing, totally not like, totally different. All right. None of that exists. You can't use for loops. Like, control flow, not a thing. Like, from a physics perspective, like, these machines, and I'm certainly not the expert on like quantum computing hardware by any means. However, I will give my best high-level summary of it, in that these are large physical machines that are actually applying like fundamental forces to particles, like the lowest, there are different types of particles you can use apparently. Let's say like a photon, you're taking like some like a subatomic particle, you are applying forces to it, and usually using things like like light or other radiation and stuff like that, in order to change the state of that subatomic particle. And the hardware itself is incredible. The fact that like we have the ability to do any of this is insane. And the keynote from the IBM, I can't remember who it was. IBM is like a VP of research, something like that. Was talking about how they've now developed a like 450 something qubit quantum computer, and we could talk a little bit more about what that means. But essentially, there's huge physical advancements in this technology. You might have heard a lot of conversations recently about this like potential superconducting material and what it could mean for humanity. And if you read a few of those articles, you'd probably see that one of the takeaways was like, oh, well, quantum computing would overnight like be on your desktop. Was obviously a bit of an absurd claim. Sure. But for what it's worth, like, the other big problem with quantum computing, and again, we'll get into this, is that you have to deal with a lot of issues of noise around how well you can control these systems, how well you can control anomalies that affect the system. Heat being the biggest one. Like, when you transfer heat through materials, they change and alter their form, and also, conductivity, all these other things change. So they have to be super cooled to, using liquid nitrogen in order for the materials inside of a quantum computer to be efficient enough and noiseless enough for you to do any sort of efficient calculation using quantum computers. And so, like, if you look at these online, if you look at a photo of it, with these crazy looking tubes or like machines, usually suspended from like the ceiling, that have like all these tubes coming out of it that are really just trying to super cool this thing down until it becomes a superconductor that we can then use for quantum computing. It's absolutely insane, right? Like, the physical side of this is incredible. I'm sure I'm doing a terrible job explaining.
I mean, it sounds like sci-fi. It sounds like that shouldn't be possible. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's totally sci-fi, but it's really cool. So totally different from classical computing. But the fundamental idea is that instead of having those instructions that you take one by one and you can check the state at any time, it's kind of like a black box where you have a bunch of particles that are in any combination of states. So like a particle, before you look at it, before you observe it, is essentially a probability of potential outcomes. So like the particle can be in this orientation or another, like, this is for physicists out there, they're gonna like cringe at me saying this, but like a photon can be in this orientation or this orientation, or this spin, that spin. And like, you don't know any of that. It's just there's a probability of one orientation or another, or a probability of one spin or another. And ahead of time, you have ways of not observing that probability. There's ways of observing that probability by taking repeated measurements and trying to figure out and kind of trying to extrapolate the state that the particles are in ahead of time. So you can't observe that probability. All you can do is observe it. And the second you observe it, there's no going back. All those different possibilities that might have existed before no longer exist. And so your observation is the only thing you can do. And so in essence, like, the types of problems you solve are just totally different. So one of the examples that the speaker gave is one of the famous ones around cryptography called Shor's algorithm. And essentially the way that most cryptography works today, and this is going to be another simplification, is that you take what are called, so like one of the famous ones, the ecliptic curve, or you take some sort of geometric object and you essentially create prime factors so there's a whole long list of prime numbers. You essentially take a random assortment of prime factors and use those to navigate your way around some crazy 3D space. And because they're prime factors, it's much more difficult to extrapolate back, because to know all the factors, you would have to look way over my head. Okay,
sure.
So just know that there's crazy problems involving prime factors, and usually the way you would, for example, crack like a computer password, is that you would have to kind of brute force it. So you would take some password, you would feed it through one of these algorithms. You've probably heard of some of them, like RSA or ECS. And these are all encryption standards where it's a one-way function where you take some content, you pass it through it, and it comes out in some way where you can't reverse that process. So standard like code crack or like password cracking, you just take guesses at that password and see if what comes out on the other end is what you're expecting. And if that's the case, you've gotten the password, right? The way that quantum computing kind of navigates around this is that instead of doing, one observation at a time, you can set some expectation for kind of potential outcomes. And there's an additional black box on either side that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
Because it was presented as black box in the talk because it was probably too complicated. There's a classical computing problem on either side for creating the expectations and analyzing the results. And I know nothing about it. However, fundamentally in the center, what you can do is set up a problem where you're able to analyze every possible combination of states for like these different prime factors. And those prime factors, again, when you multiply them together, or you do some sort of pathfinding algorithm, you get your result out the other end, and that's that one-way function. Essentially, you can simulate the state of all possible prime factors, and you have a classical computing problem on either side that allows you to, within very few tries, determine a password. So it really breaks most modern cryptography.
Crazy.
And that's today, right? Like, we don't have ways of combating this in modern cryptography. So that means, like, fundamentally, and this is getting into like conspiracy theory, Jacob, the government or IBM has a technology to break every password on the planet. All right. So like,
amazing.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
When you go to sleep, but in reality, like, quantum cryptography is a major field. There's lots of research out there. I found this talk pretty interesting. I'm planning on maybe looking into some more of it. Seems very interesting. But that's one of the famous problems. But the speaker also gave some interesting ones with graphics, which I thought were pretty cool. So one of them was ray tracing. So in standard ray tracing with, like, let's say on a GPU, what you're essentially doing is calculating collisions from rays with objects in your scene. And the way real-time ray tracing does it is that it takes the scene, it's able to divide up the 3D space into, sub volumes, and those volumes can then be parallelized and processed on your GPU using RT cores. That's the way NVIDIA real-time ray tracing works.
Is that different from CUDA cores?
Yeah, well, so an RT core is designed to accelerate this quote unquote BVH structure, like binary partition, like volume, essentially. It's just custom silicon that's designed to do that specific operation really well. But CUDA cores, and like you'll see other ray tracing, like real-time ray tracing, and like AMD, for example, it's not done on, you know, custom like dedicated cores. It can be done more generalized, just like NVIDIA developed these specialized cores to do this operation, which is really just ray triangle intersection using this accelerated BVH structure.
Gotcha.
So essentially, this quantum computing application of it would be, you can take, so each qubit, which is like, it's not like a classical bit, it represents some range of states between 0 and 1. Again, you don't know that state ahead of time. You can only observe it, and there's all sorts. You should read this guy's book if you'd like to know more. I will be reading this guy's book.
Coming Q1 2024.
Yeah. And each qubit represents some state, and it's between 0 and 1. And if you do the math, like with all of the different probabilities that add up, like you could technically represent every state, or you can represent the state of every atom in the universe in a quantum computer that has like 400 qubits. So we're already there.
Crazy.
And the idea is that, like, because you can kind of set up these different, you can kind of manipulate these probabilities a bit ahead of time, and you have your observations, you're able to do some work with it. But what you could do with ray tracing is you could take every ray, or like every pixel on the screen, and have each qubit represent every ray, and you could have another state that represents every object in your scene. And essentially, when you apply this, you technically get every intersection, but unfortunately, the way like quantum computers work, you can only get one intersection at a time. And so it's still very slow. Now, in theory, like, yes, a quantum computer is quote unquote calculating, and it's not, that's the wrong word. It is, you know, kind of, it has a representation of it, but you're only able to observe one collision at a time. There are lots of other use cases. I have let me bring up a few here that I thought were pretty interesting. So they're trying to remember the other one that was mentioned specifically.
This goes way deeper than Oppenheimer's very cursory exploration of quantum physics.
Oh, man. Yeah,
you have like one line of Oppenheimer saying, like, in quantum physics, light can exist both as a wave and a particle, and then they got to move on.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I'm trying to think of the other one. Pathfinding.
Yeah.
There are classic problems in games where you have to find, what's the fastest way between one point and another. Well, using quantum computing, you can, in one pass, calculate a valid path from the start to the finish. Doesn't mean it's the fastest one. And you might repeat it a few times and get the same result. Like, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the fastest one. In theory, it's still much faster because regardless, you're not considering any path that is not reaching your destination. So most classical operations at handling this is that you essentially, and there are more advanced algorithms for this, of course, but you start from one point and you kind of branch off in every possible direction, and then in the end you find your end location, and you're kind of keeping track of how far you're going in every possible direction to figure out. Right. If anyone wants to do more research on this, the classic algorithm is called A*. But the way it works in quantum computing is that you get a valid, like with every pass, like every calculation, you'll get a valid path. And if you just do enough of these, at some point, the probability says that you'll end up with most likely the fastest path, which is pretty interesting. Keep in mind that it's not just like simple paths. Like, this can navigate an almost infinite scale path, which is pretty cool. Like, there's no real limitations to it. Obviously, with infinite scale, there's lots of paths, so you're still not guaranteed the fastest one with today's understanding of how to develop quantum algorithms. But there's stuff like that. So my key takeaways, if you want nothing else from this, is the kinds of problems that quantum computers can solve are just fundamentally different, but they're fascinating questions about like the simulation and reproduction of physical phenomena, like like with ray tracing, like light bouncing into a scene, right? Or with like simulating things like paths or physics, or not really physics, but like imagine you had some state of the universe and you were able to say, oh, well, what happens if this state occurs? Like, what's next? Like, these are kinds of questions that, maybe we'll have the ability to answer with quantum computers. Fundamentally, though, like, it doesn't do everything. And chances are, at least the way I read the context, is that there is probably a future where like classical computing and quantum computing live together to solve problems, which I think is pretty fascinating. So the idea that you might have some subset of problems that are best addressed with classical computers, and then we have ways of otherwise impossible tasks being solved on this new genre of computing, which I find fascinating and very freaky.
Yeah, very freaky.
But overall, I think it's really cool. I think folks should check it out. And like I mentioned, Andrew Glassner, he has a website, apparently, www.glassner.com. Check it out. He has a book. I will definitely be checking that out. So for
Cool.
sure.
All right. So just to put a pin in the SIGGRAPH discussion, so out of the different announcements, quantum computing and NVIDIA stuff and AI and all this, do you think there's anything important that our listeners who are like primarily focused over in Unreal can take away as like, here's something that might fundamentally start to change my Unreal Engine workflow over the next year or two?
Yeah. So I think that of the things I saw, if you are, for example, a professional who is working in virtual production or live production, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on with how Epic and Unreal Engine is going to support that environment with their partners. So like I spoke to folks at Disguise, and there are a few other solutions that are similar that all have are all trying to bring compute and infrastructure to the virtual production environment to support the kinds of things you do in Unreal. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. And I think we'll see a lot of progress there in the next year or two. The other big thing is like USD adoption. Like I mentioned, we're going to continue to see that. Epic has invested some effort into USD, but I really expect that will continue in a big way if they are serious about the kind of media entertainment industry in general. And then when it comes to real time, I mean, and really any subject, like AI is going to play a big part of this. And we've already talked about this lots in the podcast, so we don't have to get too much into it. But there was a clear feeling across the board that people were looking to adapt to AI, and that there were big questions about what sort of things AI would be bringing to this space in short order. So those are my biggest takeaways. I would say that I really wish that I had some more time to go to talks, but just looking at the schedule, like those are the big things, like AI motion capture. Vicon was doing a markerless capture system. Radical Live is another solution that does something
Radical
similar.
AI. Yeah.
There's a bunch of these, but there's some really exciting stuff like that. I would, AI animation inside of, tools like Unreal is only going to, we saw some of that at Unreal Fest. We're going to continue to see it. Sorry, not Unreal Fest, GDC. So like, those are the big takeaways for me. As we're kind of going into the 50th year of SIGGRAPH and really graphics, consortiums in general, the big takeaways are around these fundamental changes that people see coming, and AI is playing a big part.
Gotcha. All right. And FYI, my phone just died, so no more video for me, but that's okay. Any other thoughts about SIGGRAPH in general, or should we move on to some other announcement and shout out stuff?
I would say in general, if you are thinking about getting into like a more technical side of either graphics, whether that's real time, something like Unreal, or something like VFX, I definitely recommend that you cough up the $15 to get ACM SIGGRAPH, like access to the papers, and do Google searches for quick terms, or maybe consider, volunteering to contribute to a paper, or there's lots of groups out there. If you're interested in getting more involved, I think it's a great way for you to, get access to the community of very smart and passionate people. And I think a lot of times, particularly in computer graphics, it's today kind of just considered this like very, very difficult to access industry, because there's a lot of industry knowledge and background that, it gets propagated. And I think SIGGRAPH is a great opportunity to just meet interesting people. Everyone's very genuine there, and very, again, a lot of very technical folks who I think you can learn a lot from. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in SIGGRAPH or you're interested in this industry, check it out. Read some papers. I think it's a great way to get involved.
Yeah. And to be clear, the papers aren't all super dry, and a lot of them have pictures and GIFs and videos. So, some of them are actually very engaging to go through.
Yeah.
Some of them even have downloads or like GitHub pages. So, it's definitely worth checking out. Cool. Okay. Okay for me to bounce into some shout outs.
Do it.
All right. So first, I've never shown a thing from Reddit before in the podcast, but I stumbled on this and I was kind of interested in it. What version of Unreal are you currently using? And, no surprise to see 5.2 being the one that is most frequent, but I was struck by the original poster, OP, saying that they're still in 4.27 because they're finding UE5 doesn't have the stability they need, particularly for VR and physics that they need. And then there's a lot of kind of echoing of that sentiment down here. And some of the discussion, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this, Jacob, was people kind of saying like, Unreal Engine is releasing amazing features so quickly that they aren't necessarily finding the time or resources to stabilize those features before they move on to the next features. And so there are a lot of people who are like, I wish Epic would kind of slow down and make sure that, things are basically crashing less or more usable. And I can say I can relate to this a little bit as someone who is trying to stay on the bleeding edge of Unreal. We have so many things right now that are almost working the way we want them to, but it's just not quite stable enough. We're still getting, one crash too many to feel like we can show it to a client or put it into production. So, as of now, we still have more projects that we are keeping in 4.27 than up in 5 entirely for safety. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's a double-edged sword, because I think if you took 5.2 or 5.3 and disabled those new features, which you can do, in pretty much every case, if you disabled those new features, it would be just as stable as 4.27.
I disagree with that. Things like light baking, some of the stuff that Unreal Engine 5 is trying to move away from, ray tracing, because we're now trying to do more things in Lumen. Those things over in Unreal Engine 5 do not work as well as they did in 4.27.
Well, like Lumen didn't exist, right? So that's not a fair one. But
right. But I mean, like if you take a 4.27 project and you just upgrade it to 5 and you try to keep it exactly the same and use like what we do a lot is ray traced reflections and light baking, like that does not work as well in any version of Unreal Engine 5 compared to 4.27.
Okay. Well, I obviously trust your experience there, but I think that it's a double-edged sword, because like, why would you go to 5.2 if you're going to disable all the 5.2 features, right? Like,
sure.
That's my bigger point here, is like, they're shipping a lot of new features. I think they're really cool. A lot of them are explicitly said not ready for production, and they have a lot of stuff that's not ready for production. And I agree that there's probably a lot that they could do to improve that. If I were in Epic's shoes, I'd imagine that, like, look, they just made a bunch of acquisitions. We're talking ArtStation, and we're talking Twinmotion,
Bandcamp,
MetaHuman, Sketchpad. Like, you just made a ton of acquisitions, so you have a lot of new people touching the platform. They hired a few thousand people, right?
Yeah.
The Unreal Engine team used to be like 20 people. Like, that was the engine team. It was not big. Now it's enormous. And look, Fortnite's pretty stable because they dedicate a lot of resources to it.
True.
And I get the feeling, if you're, one of their top clients, I'm sure you get the support you need to make sure it's stable. But fundamentally, yeah, I think that they're trying to push features to gain a community following, to get people interested in their platform. Like they had a big issue a few years ago in which there were just not enough people who knew anything about Unreal, right?
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
people who were getting educated on it, people who like had built a single project in Unreal. And so like all the features that they're pushing, I think a lot of that is realistically to just get people on the platform and interested.
Yeah. Get them excited.
Yeah, with the understanding that like, you know, a lot of this technology is still developing, like Lumen and Nanite, yeah, probably could have waited a year or two. If you really wanted to make it a production, you know, full parity feature, right? But fundamentally, like they saw the opportunity to release it to the public in a way where it garnered a lot of attention, got a lot of people excited about the future. They've done a lot of work in building the platform, and if anything, like as an Unreal Engine user, I would be very excited for where things are headed, even if it's like we're facing a few rough patches, just because I see it as a good thing. I could see how people could see it as a bad thing, but
yeah, totally reasonable. Okay, back to some nice shout outs. I've been following Dylan Brownmore, who has a very cool marketplace asset. What's it actually called? Let's pull it up real fast. For anyone who's only listening, Dylan Brown on Twitter or X is unfortunately, I noticed they have an X in their actual handle now. I think that predates the change from Twitter to X, but it's DYLSERX. And the marketplace asset is called Ocean System for Rendered Cinematics. And I've seen some of the development on here, and it is just absolutely gorgeous, like That's fluid amazing. Dynamics running in Unreal. It does say it's for cinematics, so I'd love to try it out and test it in real time. But the reflections and the wave movement and the level of control is really quite impressive. I was telling Jacob before the show that like I remember using really old school fluid dynamic systems where if I could get it to simulate like one frame every few seconds, I was thrilled. And the fact that this could be even near real time is super exciting.
Wow, that. I would definitely recommend you hit the link in the show notes for this one because it's very cool.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff there. And Dylan's also just great about updating everything that he's working on inside Twitter. So, you know, it's always nice to see a developer who doesn't just release something and it's done. They like continue to test it and update it and let people know what they're working on. So those are my favorite kinds of developers. Next thing I want to draw attention to. So this one, I have no idea what Polygon Flow actually is. Their description is create next generation tools to give you access to the best artistic workflow straight within Unreal Engine. What caught my eye in this video in particular was actually just the fact that they made a toolbar. And this is something that I'd love to see more of in Unreal Engine plugins. Like, don't be afraid to actually create like an actual toolbar to use, because UE5 kind of moved away from this. I think you're like not even allowed to, you know, get icons in the top ribbon or anything like that now. But to be able to have something like this where you're being very specific to the things that this tool can do, and to bring up a toolbar like this is really nice. And I like their description as well, where they say, we're giving you a state-of-the-art workflow that removes the bloat of Unreal Engine 5 and allows you to create art that you can be proud of. So what I like about that phrasing is Unreal Engine still intimidates a lot of people. And as Jacob just said, like there's so many features and there's so many exciting things. And chances are the thing that draws someone to Unreal is like maybe at most 1% of all the capabilities of the engine. So they might get intimidated seeing a bunch of things about control rig if they're just in there to make a really beautiful, you know, cinematic of with, you know, beautiful light and fog and something like that. So anytime someone's like, we want to simplify Unreal Engine and make like the tools so straightforward to use, especially from an artistic perspective, I think that's incredibly admirable. So shout out to Polygon Flow at Polygon Flow and anyone else who is trying to do that kind of stuff with Unreal.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
I think we'll see a lot more of these kinds of tool sets, just in terms of like the engine. It has a lot of, yeah, like you said, so many features. There's going to be more curated UI for a specific use case. There just has to be, because a lot of it has gotten away from that. like you said, the toolbar on the left, the shelf, with
Yeah.
all the different modes, like that used to be the different things you did in Unreal, right? Like, I think one of the reasons they hit it is because fundamentally it no longer really covered the different use cases, and so like it was kind of an irrelevant grouping even inside the viewport. Um, but I mean, this looks really cool. I'd love to see more stuff like this.
Yeah, I'm going to give them a follow live. I'm following them now. Then I don't want to say a quick shout out to me, but this is more just like an announcement that
Quick shout out to Alex.
we are starting to release a lot of our tools and the stuff that we've jumped through a lot of hoops to make work on GitHub. So if you just go to github.com/AgileLens, we're starting to open source a lot of our projects. We really worked hard to get pass-through to work both in desktop VR and mobile VR. So that's a nice little sample anyone can download. I've got my MetaHuman Studio set up, which lets you use a MetaQuest Pro to control a MetaHuman. We're starting to build our own nodes, and that does, like the one we have here, for example, allows you to set the quality of your scene pretty easily. Marshall on my team is doing a lot more with C++, so that's been cool. And then we also just released a GitHub for Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser, which we just want to gather as many people as we can. I think we mentioned this a little bit in our previous two-parter, that we want there to be a big community effort of 3D modeling and coding and basically building this archive of the project inside Unreal. So anyone who wants to help out with that is welcome to join that GitHub. All of that can be found at github.com/AgileLens. We're also going to release this week our Rage Room experience, which you can see here in the image. So destruction, fire, water, all that kind of stuff will be easily available now. This is based on a project that my team did way back in like Unreal Engine 4.17 and is upgraded now to use all the chaos physics stuff. And it's really fun to just mess around and break things. So look forward to that. Over this caught my eye because this is an Apple Vision Pro concept. This is done by Permanent Sunset at Sunset Permanent. And it's a beautiful concept for Apple Vision Pro, but it's made in Unreal Engine. And I kind of love how a lot of the pieces to it like absolutely looks like something that you could see as like menus in the style of what Apple Vision Pro was already showing. It's just a question of if would be capable of rendering it. And then, of course, a lot of the responses to this kind of stuff is like, well, why are you doing this in Unreal? You're not going to be able to release it for Apple Vision Pro. And so on that note, a few people have commented on this, and so I figure it's worth mentioning on the podcast that in the Unreal Engine GitHub now, if you go to the main branch and you go to Engine, Platforms, Vision OS, very, very early support for Unreal Engine running as a Swift UI app. So everyone is welcome to take a look at what is in here and make of it what you will. But it does seem like there is some support for Apple Vision Pro with Vision OS starting to be figured out. So, everyone need not flock immediately to Unity if they care about the Apple Vision Pro. Tentatively, it looks like there could be a way to do that inside Unreal. Hooray.
Yep. That seems pretty compelling.
Yeah. And those are my shout outs for the week.
Cool. I did not come prepared.
No, you already spoke a bunch. It's okay.
Yeah, I spoke a bunch and I mentioned a bunch of people. But I had a long week. I'm excited to be back home for a bit. Where are you heading next, Alex? Do you have anything coming up?
I think the next thing will be Unreal Fest in October. And I'm still debating whether or not I'm going to do Autodesk University. I'm supposed to give a talk there. And I loved Autodesk University back in 2017. I did it in Vegas. 2018, I did it in London. But I don't know, man, like with kids and everything and cool projects happening, like I kind of want to focus more of my time on family and actual work rather than just talking about it. But we'll see. I might change my mind. If someone wants to convince me to go to Vegas, I'll go to Vegas.
Oh, geez. I forgot it's Vegas. That's like a whole different thing.
Yeah. But yeah, what about you? Are you headed anywhere soon?
I might have a few unrelated conferences, but yeah, Unreal Fest I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Cool.
And there's also Unity has a conference in the Netherlands.
That's right.
Maybe I'll make it there. We'll see.
That'd be really fun. Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I would absolutely welcome our unofficial Unreal Engine podcast doing a Unity focused episode because of some exciting conference they did. And let's be clear, like, we're rooting for Unity. Like, we would love for Unity to do everything that Unreal's trying to do in more amazing ways. Competition is great. You know, the better Unity does something, the more everyone at Epic Games is going to be challenged to do their version better. So, like, go Unity, if we've never said that before.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we said that before, but you know, unless Epic wants to sponsor the podcast, I think we can get away with it.
We can do whatever we want. I mean, it would be really funny if, like, fast forward 3 years or 3 seasons from now, and we still call it the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, and it's like entirely devoted to Blender or Unity or something else.
It's going to be so full circle.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, cool. Well, I think we're just about wrapped up here, Alex. What'd you say?
Yeah, thanks as always to our producer, Alan, who makes us sound and look as good as we can running on our novice tools. And also apologies to Alan, because I realized that Alan had made the suggestion that for our first season, we try to do 20 episodes. And this is technically the 20th episode. So I think Alan would have preferred that we call this the final episode. But I already announced this is the first episode of the new season. So I guess we're going to stick with that. No worries.
Yeah,
19 episodes in that first season.
Don't worry about it. We'll do 20 next season.
There we go.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. You know, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Welcome to V0.2.
Woo! Hooray! Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.